Welcome to Game Changers Innovation Podcast, sponsored by the Global Innovation Management Institute. I'm Mark Ranella. Our first podcast kicks off the same week as International Women's Day. In honor of this annual celebration of women's contributions to society, we're focusing this podcast on the topic of women in innovation. As in many other aspects of internal company politics and processes, women interested in contributing to innovation sometimes face some formidable challenges in getting their ideas heard. This can be damaging to innovation projects because innovation, maybe more than any other business function, thrives in a culture that invites a diversity of ideas and thinking styles to the table. We're fortunate to have as our first guest somebody who is particularly qualified to discuss this and related issues. She's Alice Chung, Senior Manager of Business Operations at Genentech. Alice's career has been highlighted by many successful innovation projects, and she has recently been recognized by Genentech for some outstanding work she's done in the field of artificial intelligence. Alice, thank you so much for your time and welcome to Game Changers Podcast. I'd like to start this off by asking a simple but fundamental question. What do women bring to the field of innovation that's unique?
That's a great question. Now, if I have to think about what's truly unique, women tend to be a little more detail-oriented. When this skill is applied effectively in planning, risk mitigations, or even in design or executions of any innovation effort, it could be really helpful from a diversity of thoughts perspective. I think, if we look at the characteristics of what women bring, this actually, to me, stands out a little bit more compared to others.
Right. So I imagine you found yourself in a lot of meetings and similar situations in which men were clearly the majority. So I'm wondering, what do you do in those situations to make sure that your particular strengths are being noticed?
I ask a lot more questions. I try to understand a lot of different perspectives and try to think of it more holistically in a lot of design aspects as well as execution.
And can you think of a moment in which being detail-oriented was crucially important to the success of a project?
Yes. One aspect of a project that I'm recently working on has to do with the initial planning. So we're designing an innovative effort, which is the first time it has been done. And high-level buckets of activities can always be thought through. This is relatively simple to design an initial prototype. The execution risks, however, and the activities, for me, I'm actually thinking backwards. How does it work from a longer-term perspective? Can those details that we have known from other successful innovation projects be applied right from the beginning during the initial prototype design so that any iterative activities that goes forward can already incorporate the essence of what the true outcome and endpoint of the program could look like. So that's one aspect of really thinking it differently, but really have to think about it in a much more detailed fashion, not losing the bigger picture to make the project successful so you are able to navigate and mitigate risks along the way because you have to make decisions to make the prototype work so that it doesn't fail too much, but it can fail early enough that you can have a way to prevent it. And a lot of it is details. The devil is in the details.
So I was also wondering, from your vantage point, having had so much experience in the field of innovation, what do you think are some significant opportunities and challenges for women in innovation in the future?
I like that question, so thank you for asking that. I think it's the same challenges and opportunities that exist in all industries, specifically in the field of innovations. The qualities, perceptions, and expectations associated with women from the society and workplace versus looking and measuring results or asking enough context to compare and judge fairly is what prevents women from advancing in the field of innovation. If a woman, in any workplaces or trying to innovate, if a woman innovates and is successful the first time, it's based on luck. That's how it's being perceived. If a woman happens to innovate multiple times consistently, it's a threat and it will create insecurities for others. The women innovators who are rising stars tend to be misunderstood as in their careers unless they are in an environment where demonstrating results and being able and allowed to be different is acceptable as the norm. So unfortunately, in many workplaces across many industries, the environment organization hierarchy is managed and encouraged where conformity and control as the socially acceptable behavior standards. So the challenge this presents for a women innovator is twice as hard compared to a man innovator based on my own experiences and observations from also talking to other women innovators who also have similar issues that they have faced. So the only way to overcome this challenge, which is also an opportunity, is through dedications and determination to pursue what they believe in, regardless of the adversities they face. It is sad, but that's the reality.
And it sounds like you have a bit of a support network there. You're saying that you talk to other women innovators. Is that the case? Do you sort of talk outside of work to other innovators to get ideas and help?
Yes, my own network, for people who represent characteristics of innovations, right? Whether it's men or women, they are all facing the same issues. And in other fields as well, through other friends, colleagues, and based on what they've heard and what they have observed, it's fairly similar patterns in terms of challenges that they face and also opportunities.
Right. I'm just wondering if you act much as a mentor to other women in your company.
I do. I mentor to both actually men and women who's got the attitude and motivation to learn, as well as having the discipline to make things happen. Innovation can actually be trained. And, for what I have observed and also applied, I think the apprentice model actually works very well, in my opinion. So I do that. Actually, through some of the informal networks is where I do most of the mentoring.
Mm. So I'm thinking in an ideal situation, right, as you brought up that women have certain strengths, maybe more detail-oriented, and men probably have their strengths. I'm wondering what each would bring to the table in an innovation project so that they got the best from each other.
Innovation initiatives, regardless of gender, is focusing around diversity of thoughts. So the best way in which innovators, whether it's men or women, can bring to the table is what specific diversity of thoughts that they can contribute to have actually very healthy debates and conflicts during the design and the execution to solve whatever problems that they have to solve. And allowed and created environment that one can truly speak freely. Not about your styles, not about your own agenda. It's really trying to get your point across to solve the problems. Men innovators tend to be very logical in terms of the ideas that they bring to the tables, the pros and cons that they bring to the table. Sometimes out of the box thinkings to bring to the table. Those are all great. Women innovators can do the same thing too. And if I talked about some of these earlier detail pieces, if both men and women can try to link it and build on each other's ideas right from the beginnings, then the innovation initiatives by itself has the best of both worlds. Not about gender, it's about pooling everybody's talents and diversity of thoughts in that regard to solve the problem in a very simple, ideal way, which is not about styles, not about gender. It's about can all of us combine all of our different strengths in terms of diversity of thoughts and innovative techniques to make things happen.
So making it clear from the very beginning that you're welcoming many styles of thoughts, many styles of approaching innovation, that's important from the very start. That's an interesting point. So I wanted to shift a little bit then to talk about your particular story. I heard that you recently won an award at Genentech for, I think it's called a Commercial Pioneer Award. I'm wondering if you could tell us about that.
Sure. So that particular award is stemmed from one of an existing mature services that we offered to our internal Genentech teams, which is focusing really around effective targeting to certain populations, if you will. We have matured these processes for a couple years, and every time when we are getting new requests to focus a lot more around effective targeting for a certain, physician population, as an example, we have to continue to enhance what we are able to do. Now, sometimes when you do a handful of this, you'll be like, hey, I have this idea. I wonder with new technologies, are we able to do something different so that the results and the speed can be done faster, a lot more precise. I personally am passionate about emerging technologies. So through one of the conferences and actually one of discussions, thought about an idea of using artificial intelligence, natural language processing techniques to refine this process. So the project itself pretty much launched a pilot of 8 weeks to try to train and work with a vendor in this regard to see if this idea can actually be achieved. So the good thing is everything that we thought of and we were being patient throughout this process, we're able to achieve with what we expected from an endpoint perspective. But the actual process to go through this innovation was actually quite difficult at first, just because it's new. We haven't done it before. We have to make sure all the parameters are set up right, as if you would set up an experiment and see what the experiment could lead to the outcome. So that was what the project was about. And short 8 weeks, we got an endpoint. We were able to design this model right from the beginning, as I've alluded to earlier, in terms of what the longer-term outcome would be. So it has a lot of flexibilities for us to morph and grow, to integrate into our regular service offerings, which is what we're doing right now. And that helps with the applying detailed applications and risk mitigations along the way to make it happen. So we're right now trying to scale it. And we have done it successfully in a few new projects using these techniques. So that's the background of innovating with this project that we have won, which has tons of potentials to scale up and apply to multiple areas.
That's very exciting. And have you been working with artificial intelligence a lot?
We have been studying it. The funny part about artificial intelligence is this is a field that has been around for 50 years. It is the recent success of all the other technologies to bring this field very prominent, and that's why it's the hot topic out in the industry. Studying a lot also means, depending on where you're at, to be able to take any innovative initiatives, that we have to be very selective in terms of the projects we pursued based on available resources. So I got lots of ideas, but I'm also trying to figure out when and what is the best time to test it based on availability of the technology, right? And that itself is a risk taking. So you have a lot of ideas. You have to figure out which one bubbles up, and you have to figure out how to pursue it to mitigate any risks so that the outcome you want to achieve can be a little more successful and not fail. Not that failure is not acceptable, but is reducing the chances that it would fail.
Understood. Understood. So, just looking back at your past, I'm just wondering if you've got a favorite or best innovation story you've been involved in, something that you like to tell people, success or something interesting that happened.
My best innovation story is a program that I have designed and implemented 10 years ago, supporting our researchers. So the goal was to create a sustainable and flexible infrastructure with added convenience and access to commonly used research supplies. So that time I was supporting our researchers while optimize space, reduce costs, waste, and enhance overall program control. It sounds like a very big goal. At that time, I was the business lead along with 50 cross-functional team members for input and ideas to try to achieve this goal of creating this, sustainable and flexible infrastructure. Together as a team, we used $80,000 startup cost to create a program that saves $5 million annually using 6 months to implement. This program was called G-Supply, which supports over 1,200 researchers. So 10 years later, this program is still working effectively. So as I looked back, what are some of the characteristics that this program contains? It includes a lot of automation, including the use of RFIDs in some areas, huge diversity of supplies and research needs across over 10 buildings, 3 to 4 floors per building. So a lot of footprint, if you will. And what I loved about it was the collaborations with researchers, both men and women, to really solve issues in a scientific yet creative ways to be able to execute and design this program flawlessly. This is also the piece that I miss the most in working with, innovations and researchers and scientists, as an example, to have that really healthy debates and conflicts, as I initially mentioned, in a problem-solving situations where you can truly speak freely, right? And this is where the best of all of our diversity of thoughts come together to make things happen. So this will be one of my best innovation stories to talk about. 10 years ago, there's no artificial intelligence projects to apply, but there are components around automation that can still be making this a lot more effectively, that can be used as innovation showcase, if you will. So that's my best innovation story that I would say.
And I like that you brought up that there was this ability to have conflict, because I think we all know that if you're going to be creative or be in a creative atmosphere, that means people will disagree. There's got to be disagreement, and it sounds like the conflict is healthy in this process.
Yes, and actually in the absence of conflicts and the individual's tolerance to conflicts is what makes and breaks any innovation projects, because you have to solve problems and trying to figure out the best way to do it. And the differences of those conflicts and the outcome of dealing with those is what make it stands out more compared to just regular problem solving.
So I just want to wrap up with one general question. Either what's the best piece of advice you've received about innovation, or perhaps what advice do you usually give others about it who have questions?
All right. So innovation is about problem solving. Innovation takes time, and to execute well, you always need to have a backup plan, as you constantly have to navigate and make decisions that are against the norm based on challenges encountered along the way. Innovators, unfortunately, are often being misunderstood in that regard during that process until people catch us on to realize what happens. So my advice would be stick with what you believe in and really have a lot more patience and tolerance to conflicts and any adversity, and be determined in terms of what you're able to see, and that don't give up when you face adversity. But it's challenging in the environment that we're in. So that would be the advice that I would give to anybody, both men and women, to hone in on their innovation projects, or just hone in on their passions around innovation.
Well, it certainly sounds like you've been quite passionate and productive in innovation. I really thank you for all these insights concerning women in innovation and innovation in general. I think this has been great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that wraps it up for our first Game Changers podcast. I'm looking forward to traveling the globe, asking people from different industries with different approaches to innovation about their stories. We're looking forward to hearing from you about your interests, what you enjoyed about this podcast, what you'd like to hear in the future. I'd like to thank Yulia Komensaita for her moral and logistical support in this endeavor, and we're looking forward to sharing more ideas with you about innovation, game-changing ideas, and interesting changes to come in the future. This is Mark Ranella. Have a great week.